Hi, I'm Jennifer Jill Araya.
And I'm Sarah Beth Goer.
Welcome to the Crafting Audiobooks podcast, where we discuss the art and craft of audiobooks, and we aim to go deep quick.
Welcome, everybody. Very, very excited to report that today we have with us Robin Miles, award-winning audiobook narrator, director, producer, and acting professor. Robin, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you too.
Thank you for being here. And we're an audiobook podcast that likes to dive deep quick, so we're going to jump right in.
Mm-hmm.
When you first started narrating, what are the first key principles you learned about the craft of audiobook narration?
That's a really good question. I think for me, the kind of fundamental thing that everybody stressed for me, and I talked to people, I was new in the studio, very nervous and new, is that you always must be talking to someone. And interestingly, I noticed that can be misinterpreted. You're always talking to somebody. It's not a group of people. It's a person. That's what I discovered was the big distinction, that when I would listen to some people, especially like new narrators, it sounded like they were giving a lecture. They were talking to a crowd of people, so they were spreading their message over the crowd. And it lacked something, and it wasn't until later on that I was able to name what that thing that was lacking was, and it was intimacy. Like, this is a conversation between two people, not me and a group, two people. And I found, interestingly, that it hooks up directly with a technique I learned at Yale Drama School where, a person is addressing a crowd of people, but you address this person first, and then you make eye contact with the next person, and then you move to the next person, and then you move to the next person, so that when you talk to a group, you've had 6 individual conversations because you've made eye contact with individuals, not spread out over the crowd. And that was golden. That was just golden advice.
That sounds like a very powerful principle that you use to this day. I'd love if you could elaborate a little bit how you use it to this day. Like when you are prepping your manuscript, do you use the context of the book to discern who this person will be? Do you use a real person or a totally made up fictional person?
That's another really good question. I often, like in my classes, I often refer to the narrator in a third person sense as the narrating persona. And you have to be that persona. And the author, whoever your author is, has written a narrating persona. It might not be who I am just walking down the street every day or just existing every day. So I've got to pick up the clues about what's the who am I of that narrating persona? Is this a person who is very conversational? Do they use a lot of metaphors and poetic language? A big question I have, and this actually is part of my script analysis prep, is to absorb, maybe is a better word. Like, how close or distant is that narrating persona from the person you're talking to? Is this like a couple of white chicks sitting around talking? Remember that Broadway show like 20 years ago that had that title? Is this like two people just literally like sitting a foot away from each other, having a really colloquial conversation? Or is there like an observer position that I'm in, that I look out over everything? Or am I getting up into people, like peeking in their underwear? How close am I to them? Because and it's all in the writing, I have to kind of let it in. And the way I do that is to put the words in my mouth and start speaking them. And then I get from how it feels right, what is that level of distance? I don't think it's a left brain intellectual thing. to me, I feel like I feel it. It's like I could close my eyes and feel my hands in the dark and figure out my way. I don't need to use my left brain for that. But who is this narrator? One of my favorite authors, Margaret Atwood, she can be very cheeky, and she can write a very cheeky narrating persona who will comment on people sarcastically, and it's in the writing. And so Udo's a fun to play, a kind of snarky narrator. But if my author hasn't written that, I can't just lay that on there, because I have to, I have to be that author's stand-in for what they intended. It's not I didn't write the book. I'm just trying to pick up all the clues. So I don't know if does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I have a question. We're going to talk more about your prep in a moment, but did I pick up that you actually read some of the book out loud as part of your prep process to sort of figure out how close that narrator is? Oh, I love that.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's like there's two parts to that. One is to determine, what's this distance from things? Where's the observer position? Like, how close am I to the action? How close am I to these people? Do I have is my personal opinion written in there a lot? But the other thing, too, is like your author writes you'll find authors have like an average sentence length. And I need to give over to whatever their length of sentence their thought is, their mental process. It's not mine. And if I'm going to be their stand-in, I got to set myself aside and let their voice in. And so I start speaking their thoughts to see how do they work through their thoughts? How do they spot things and see things and express them? Is it short and pithy? Are there sentence fragments? Lots of sentence fragments. Is it full thoughts? I've done a couple of British authors, and boy, do they have long thoughts. Longer than Americans. And so that also means now you're going to have to figure out where to breathe to keep the thought rolling forward if it's complex like that. So, yeah.
I think I might add reading out loud to my prep process. That's not something I necessarily even ever thought of.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why I hadn't thought of that, but that's a really good idea. Thank you, Robin.
Yeah. I'll spend about a half hour doing that to feel it out. And then, like, sometimes the book I'm doing right now, I started reading it and I went, oh, yeah, okay, she thinks like I do. Length of thoughts, interjections. Yeah, I went, oh, okay, great. And that's exactly what's happened. I've gone into the booth the past couple of days, and I can read like 2 pages without a mistake because she and I are so close in our process. If we're further apart, yeah, I'll make more mistakes. Sure. If it's shorter and choppier than mine, or longer and more legato than my thoughts, either way. So, yeah, that's fun to do.
Very cool. There's an author that I work with very frequently, and her sentence structure very much matches my own. So I always enjoy narrating her books.
Yeah. I keep encouraging my students at Pace University to read more. They're in conservatory, so they're reading plays, but I always tell them, yeah, but those plays, they're only half of the source of half of the film and TV projects that come out there. Half of them, at least, are from books. Yeah. So get used to being able to see what authors do. I love reading. I'm such a geek. I'm a book hoe.
I love that. Well, that conversation all stemmed from something you learned very on in your narration career. I'd love to kind of advance forward a little bit. What is something specific that you have learned about the craft of narration over time that now has a big impact on how you work day to day?
Well, I think I've just said it, actually. I have to spend some time working the dialogue so I know 2 things. Who am I of the narrator is, just telling the story, like speaking it out loud, so that I go, okay, all right, I got it in my body. It's about the physical experience. Those things have to filter into like my cells or my muscles. And And I need to get well, this is different. No, it is different. The character dialogue. I need to get those characters in my mouth and see, what does my body do? Does my arm make a gesture when I start to speak as her? If that's so and it's natural, I go, oh, okay, look what she does every time she speaks. And then I'll make note of it so that now when I start the book, I can slip that character on like a garment. But if I don't do that, it'll take me a couple of chapters to really, every time that person speaks, I'm going, did I get that right? It's a little bit of tentativeness on my part, but I will not be tentative if I've just talked as them for a bit. So I'll go through a couple of dialogue scenes. I would never have done that in the beginning. I might have looked at the beginning of the book and gone, okay, good, great. But it's specific to put it in my mouth. Because I want to see how my body will follow, like with a hand gesture. Am I looking down my nose at somebody? Does she have a jutting out chin? You know what I mean? Like there'll be a bodily gesture playing a character, and I want to know what it is, so that she stays or he stays consistent from the first time they speak all the way through. Yeah, that took a few years to get that.
I love that so much. So you may not remember this, Robin, but the very first time I met you back in early 2019, I took a workshop that you were leading, and you talked about the physicality of characters and using your physicality in character voices. And that is a foundational principle that I use every day, all the time, still think about it to this day in my work. So
I'm so glad.
I love that you brought up the physicality of your character voices as something that you still think about, because your thoughts about that, 5 years ago had such a huge impact on how I do my work. So thank you.
I am so glad. And what kinds of things did you discover doing characters for yourself physically?
The biggest thing is sort of what you just said, that if I take the time ahead of the book to figure out where the voice lies and what physically I'm going to do as a natural part of portraying that character, if I do that ahead of time, then in the process, I can easily slip into the character and know that I'm staying consistent. I have one character that I did in a whole bunch of books. It was a series, so I'll never forget it. And she was sort of a street tough kid, so I leaned back and put my hands in fists. And all I have to do is just lean slightly back in my stance and put my hands in fists, and I'm in her voice.
Yes.
And it's just that dropping into it and comfort that comes from that is delightful.
It's funny. I'm so glad you used that phrase, dropping in, because that's a Kristen Linkletter technique. And I took a workshop with her, and my teacher who taught me also had learned from Kristen Linkletter. And so, some of the training is dropping in on a word. Like you can drop in different ways, like the way you just did, like with the fists, dropping into the character through the physicality. But you can also let a word, the meaning of a word, speaking it, let it drop into your body and let the vibration of it cause whatever emotional response it causes or image that it will conjure. And then you just let your body respond to it and just let it go. As opposed to reading it, knowing that there's certain emotions or situations going on and trying to do them, because it ends up ringing slightly false, or it's like out of phase, two images that are not in sync. They're slightly out of phase. That's what I find happens when someone tries too hard to create the mood or the tone of it. Just kind of let the word drop in and trust that your body is going to react to it. It's going to give up what it needs to give up. And if you don't hear it, take it again. Let it drop in deeper. Give it a shot a second time. But to resist that urge to make it be, make it do. I love the way you describe your technique too. I thought that was great.
Well, it came from you, so there you go.
Uh-oh, I hope I'm not being narcissistic.
Not at all.
Got too much of that in the world today. Oh my gosh.
I'm really curious, we've been on a track here with this body-based and intuitive approach and physical approach. And so I'm curious how you'll answer this next question, whether there is an intellectual component involved or if you even do text analysis in a body-based way, because the question is, when you're prepping a book, how are you approaching text analysis? What are you digging into? And perhaps you've already answered this with the way you get it into your body. And I wonder if there's any other elements of the text analysis that's a part of your process.
Well, the irony is I teach script analysis to the freshmen in a conservatory. So I'm constantly going over the principles. But I would say there is a slight difference with the script analysis for a play, really, and for a book. When it's a book, I have two things that I do. One is the shared thing between plays and audiobooks. When I look at the dialogue scenes, I want to know what is the event of that scene. If there's a scene between two people, what's the thing that transpires between these two people? Person A goes in wanting this, person B goes in wanting that. What is the thing that happens? In the course of this scene, through much haranguing, so-and-so proposes marriage to the other is basically what happens. So I know that's the arc of the scene. So I will look at the scenes and just check in to make sure I know what's actually happening between the two people. Like, is there a competition? These three girls are in a scene and one of them wants to convince B to try it this way, and C wants to convince B to do it this way. And so they're kind of fighting over which one's going to win. I can do that. Now I know what everybody's invested in the scene. And I like this essentially deciding what the objective is. When it comes to the rest of the book, I'm much more of a kind of a big picture person. We've already looked at or actually talked about I want to know what the baseline pace of the book is. Like, what's the basic narration pace? Because when we get to, rising action, it's going to get faster. And when we get to a climax, it's going to do that. Or certain things might slow down. Like when you're in an accelerated scene, it sometimes slows down because that's what actually makes the, like a Spielberg movie. He slows down the images. I want to know the length of the thoughts. I want to know what the basic pace is. But I also want to know, and it's something you can't know until you've read the whole book. My script analysis is I want to know, is there a central premise or question to this book? Is it a book that says, love is really hard and in the end, you're crazy to try it? Is that what the book is basically underneath it? All of these words and experiences and what happens to the character equals this conclusion? If it's a nonfiction book especially, I want to know what the thesis is, if there's a thesis. Does my author say, this chemical process will revolutionize blah-de-blah in the world? And I want you to agree with that. I want to be able to convince you of that by the end. That's their central thesis. Everything in that book is basically going to be a support of getting you to agree with that by the end, after they've given you all the evidence. And if I'm going to be their stand-in, I need to know what I'm fighting for. So if it's nonfiction especially, I'll look for the thesis. If it's fiction, I'll look for, is there a central, or even a sentence or a paragraph that encapsulates what the summation of the journey is. Because everything will sort of roll back to that, even in an oblique way, to leaving that impression behind. And I don't even know how I do that, except I read the book and I just listen. And then I may be wrong. I'll come up with an idea about, this is a book about blah, blah, blah. And then I'll have that idea in mind. And usually a good writer will tie the actions, the events, and the characters into the through line of that. I'm looking for the through line. That's a good word, actually, the through line.
I'm really hearing that interplay between the intuition and the intellectual. Like you said, how do I do that? Well, I read the book. So it's like you read and you're absorbing instinctually. And then from that, you can intellectually say, like, you know what? I've without thinking really hard about it, just naturally, organically, I can draw this through line, and the through line is, and by being clear on that in a sort of a little bit more crystallized intellectual way, you've now strengthened sort of where you'll fall back into with your intuition.
You know, I had a student ask me, and he was so embarrassed to ask it, and I didn't want him to be embarrassed. I was talking about tone, the tone of a book, and, you know, the sort of themes, and he raised his hand and he went, but how do you find where the theme is? Like, how do you find where the tone is? And one of the things that happens when you're reading thousands of words is that there'll be words that reinforce certain image clusters, like a book that is dark and macabre will literally have words like dark, obscure, gray, black, macabre. You know what I mean? The tone of the word choice that the novelist uses, there'll be clusters of words that will give you dark images, heaviness, heavy images. And if you just kind of them in, you feel them. Or if it's bright lights, big city, New York City, everything's fast, you'll notice that like the sentence structure is choppier and there'll be more sentence fragments instead of full, you know, subject and predicate. You know, there'll be a subject sentence and then there'll be predicate, you know, these little bits and pieces. It's like, you know, he was sitting with his girlfriend in the booth in the back, in the corner, in the dark. And those will be all little fragments of sentences instead of one connected by commas. So, but again, that idea of talking about stones and hard things and concrete and dark things might produce a feeling of heaviness, or sunshine, the color yellow, blonde hair, a chirpy voice, eyeglasses that are, you know, cat-eyed and playful. If you allow all those author word choices in, they start pinging in places. And I mean, if I were AI, I would be like, you know, chewing it up and analyzing it, spitting it out. But there's actually a Shakespeare concordance is a book of all the Shakespeare plays. And what it'll do is it'll give you the frequency of certain words that appear in the play. And so if you have a concordance, you could actually look up a Shakespeare play and see the number of times the word black appears, or black and gray. You could choose, and it'll give you a number or a verb. And so in a way, that's kind of like a computer spitting out an analysis of it. But that's what's so fabulous about humans. We feel it. We don't actually feed it through we don't really feed it through our left brain. We feed it through our senses, and we feel what the author left behind. And that's why we're so much better than AI. AI can't do that.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a beautiful image. And that actually blends very well into something that you told us ahead of time that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Said that you wanted to speak to the importance of truth in narration and narrator's humanity. So I would love for you to tell us a bit about why that matters to you, why it's important.
It's important to me, gosh, from like on a cellular level all the way out to the rest of the world, because books try to share a human experience, one person's or one character's, with its audience. And when we share experience, we realize that we're close to other people, that we have something in common, that these other entities walking around that have arms and legs have as much value as I do, or you do, you know, whoever's doing the reading. And the problem with AI is that AI reports on, it's reportage. I'm just going to report on this experience. It doesn't actually experience it. And I think the process of walking with the narrator, I say walking with because we go on a journey together. It's like that narrator does the discovering of things. You know how like you'll get to a part in a book and the narrator comes to a conclusion? I can actually experience the discovery of thinking it for the first time so that you go on that journey of discovering it with me in that moment. Or if I don't know what I want to do and I'm weighing details back and forth and valuing them, I bring you on the journey of how difficult it was maybe for me to weigh that. Again, AI reads and it reads the end, the summation, the product of it, right? This is the decision that was made, as opposed to hearing me go, or there are moments in a book when we're taken by surprise. When, you know how like you said, well, something happens that the character didn't expect. And you get to have that sense of delight and surprise with them. You don't get that with AI because they don't know that that's what's going on. And without that commonality, that journey that we walk on together, it's easy to forget for people who are in conflict with each other or at odds with each other. God knows that's all we are these days in the United States, that we forget that we have so much in common, that we are all human and we all go through these things and we are connected to each other. I do a lot of historical fiction, and I love how writers who do historical fiction will do so much research to write so much truth into things. Because, and I don't know how to describe this, but I remember when the Dylan Roof murders happened years ago, I remember being dumbfounded how a person could sit in a church in communion with other people, and after an hour, murder them. I was so dumbfounded by how that could be. And so I was reading an article, and back in the day, the articles were just starting to do like hyperlinks, and they were talking about how he had been radicalized online and had gone to these white supremacy sites. And there were hyperlinks, and I went, I want to what did he read? And so I hyperlinked over, and I started reading some of these texts that white supremacists were writing and talking about how all these different cultures around the world, but specifically Black people, had not contributed anything to the world. And I was like, you know how easy that is to disprove if you do your homework. But the point was, to find out that that's wrong, you have to have been taught that. You have to have been exposed to, the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm like, excuse me, algebra, the Arab world, there's just so many other cultures you can look to and see what the different contributions, over time have been. But these are people who really believe that their supremacy is rooted in that. And so I love doing historical fiction because, again, it starts to help people to be exposed to those kinds of truths, that kind of broadening of knowledge. And everybody should have their knowledge broadened, in my opinion. So I think we do a tremendous service in the world, human to human, human to human. And the last thing I'll say, too, is I'm a big audio drama fan. And one of the things that I do see happening that I think is so fabulous, and it started years ago, is that, we're very rigid in the audiobook world. I admit it, I'm one of those people, I'm like a purist. I'm like, don't give me any music. I don't need any music. Just give me the book, right? Give me the good narrator that'll really keep me locked in. So one of the things I think is so fabulous is that I feel like we're on the verge of a creative explosion that all right, the Brits are already ahead. They're leading us on this there. But I remember the first time I did something that was more of a full production. I was directing the Lincoln Douglas debates, and it was Richard Dreyfuss and David Strathairn. And I was David's director for most of it. I only worked with Richard for 1 or 2 days, I think. But they took the debates that Abraham Lincoln and what's his name? Douglas. I forgot his first name. Anyway, were having presidential debates, and they would stop in a place, a big open area, and they would have these debates, and whoever was there that transcribed them literally wrote down the crowd laughs, like places where, what was the reaction, in addition to transcribing their words. And so I think it was BBC America that produced it, can't remember now. They wanted to produce it and put in the crowd sounds and make it feel like it was happening in the moment. Brilliant. It was also rather helpful because there were times where the crowd laughed, and this is very archaic language, and you're looking at it going, somebody made a joke? Oh God, okay, what's funny? Now I gotta go find out. I gotta dig in there and figure out why was that a pun line or a punch line or whatever have you. But that was the first time I saw that to such great effect. And then, flash forward, I was directing Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. We added music, we added sound effects. It was a cast of thousands with like 116 characters, I think it was. But we had, again, the audio drama, I was given the license to take some of the scenes and pare down the literary quality and just keep it as a scene. It stood on its own perfectly fine. And if something was going on that's mentioned, we could put the tinkly laughter of somebody as opposed to referring to it. We could put the music in the background instead of referring to it. I got a little bit of leeway, but our business is pretty much purist. We stick to whatever the author wrote, but I feel like that's beginning to loosen. I'm right now listening to Lock and Key, which was the graphic novel by Stephen King's son. His name's going to evade me at the moment, but it was produced and directed by Bill DeFries and Fred Greenhall, and we were literally, I would take the bus up to Maine and we would go to on-site locations so that we could get the natural sounds. So we were at a beach house when they were at a beach house. And when we were in the underground place, Bill and Fred found an underground old mill. It was a paper mill. And it was underneath where the water was going by, where the water wheel would have been turned. But it was dug into the rock. So it was moldy and stuff was dripping from the walls, but it sounded great, And so I think we are starting to punch through because that kind of stuff happened. The Starling Project came out. Remember that one? That was, it went right to audio instead of being released as a book. And the Times did a big thing on that. And then The World We Make and The City We Became, the N.K. Jemisin titles were done with little bits of stuff in them and some really creative stuff on her team. Amanda Rose Smith did the Vela, and she added for Realm, and she added little things in the background. So the spiders that are crawling on the floor, you get little kind of like sounds. And then I think the pinnacle for me was, Mary Jane Wells. She did Heroine, and she won for Best Original Work a couple of years ago. I think it was the same year that I won for my thing too. Heroine is fully produced with sound effects, and she also used other actors. So, here's this female soldier and going into battle and having flashbacks. It is so amazing. It is so amazing. And she also breaks the fourth wall and talks to you. So I really feel like we're right on the precipice of breaking through and into a fully immersive. Yeah, I guess immersive is really it. Immersible, definitely water. Immersive, an immersive experience. So I hope to see more of that. And I keep looking for something that I can do. And I'm not sure what I want to do yet, but I hope that we push that envelope more.
Well, I tell you what, our last question is what's exciting you about the craft right now today that we ask each other. But I'm wondering if perhaps that is actually the answer that you just gave.
It totally is. Maybe I I jumped the
You
dog.
psychically moved forward to our final. And I'm really hearing, you blended the question or your answers, your answer from why it's so important to be human, blended into your answer of this immersive experience. And so I think it's really delicious to sort of reflect on the two in tandem and to say, and it even blends in from all the conversation you're having about physically embodying the moments, because as we physically embody the moments, then that's what we as humans are bringing. That is that human biological experience that AI can't do. And then we're on this new frontier of expanding the sort of immersive environment of humans in the audio format. So I can kind of see this beautiful through line, if you will, that got you from the start of the interview to here.
Well, a bunch of women get around together. We start talking, and good things happen. Some joy gets released, and I think we make good observations. That's what I think.
I agree.
Cool. Yeah.
Jennifer, so shall we jump then to
sure.
you and me, Jennifer? You already have Robin's beautiful answer. What is exciting you about the craft right now today?
Sure. So today I am delighting in the richness of this morning, finishing recording on my first ever novel in verse. And I was so absolutely thrilled when I was asked to be part of this project. I have loved poetry since I was a kid and first read Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. I absolutely devoured poetry in middle and high school, and even still, like a third of the library of books that I own are poetry books. And I just adore the genre of telling a full novel in verse format in poetry. And so getting to narrate this particular novel in verse this week has been so much fun and just a huge privilege. So I guess today what I'm really excited about is getting to explore a new to my narration work genre for me, and that I got to dig into a literary form that I've enjoyed almost as long as I could read. It was a true privilege, true privilege.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, speaking of getting the words in your body and, putting your mouth around them, is there anything you noticed about your craft as you were performing in verse for the first time as opposed to performing in prose?
Sure. So a big thing in this particular book, the verse was very freeform. There was no structure or really even much rhythm to the poems at all. I did a lot of listening to novels in verse ahead of time and listened to some that had really strong rhythms, and the narrators brought that out, and others that were more prose-like but very simple in their style, which is a little bit more what this particular one was. What I did notice is that visually, the way that the lines were broken up was really helping me with my pacing. It was kind of making some of those pacing decisions for me ahead of time in a really lovely and instinctual way. And sometimes the author would break the lines in a place that I might not have chosen, but I could understand why she made the decisions that she did in terms of the formatting on the page for those poems. And then also the few times, it probably over the whole book only happened like 4 times, but that there was a rhyme scheme was just delightful and felt delicious in my mouth. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that's an exciting thing to discover as a narrator. Like there's a reason, there's a rhyme scheme right there in that moment if it only happens 4 times. And
it might not have even been 4 times. I think it could have been just 2 or 3, but it was very, very infrequent.
Yeah,
cool.
that makes me think of what you and Robin were talking about dropping in, and that sometimes it's dropping into a moment. Like those are clearly moments where the author intended that dropping in.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, I want to know what you're excited about today. Please tell.
I'm excited about lightness. I'm excited about fun and play. I was actually listening to, so back in our episode with Linda Korn, there were 2 books she recommended, and I was listening to one of them, The Underdogs, which is narrated by Alexandra Ryan. And I was reflecting, like, why are these character voices working so well? Like, what exactly is happening here? And yes, there were all the technical elements that were happening that were making the voices work really well. But then there was also this play and this delight that Alexandra brought in when she was embodying the characters, and that play, like that sparkle really shone through and affected me as a listener. And I was thinking about how, like, yeah, I mean, that's The Underdogs is like a kiddo's graphic novel. It's one that sort of lends itself to that sparkle and that fun. But it occurred to me that even, in a tragic piece written for adults, I think the narrator themselves, like leaning into the juiciness of the piece and allowing, there can be like delight and pleasure in pain, even because it's the human experience. And so bringing that play and that sort of exploration, I think could serve any piece. So I got excited about that this week.
Having play and lightness as you're making your choices during the prep process or figuring out what those character voices are, even in the most intense piece, playing in the choices that you make, I think can free us up to make choices that aren't maybe as obvious, but perhaps are truer to the text and also truer to who we are as the artists bringing ourselves to that text. I love that.
So well put. It's like you wrote it in advance. It was like a beautiful little essay right there.
I promise I didn't. But no, that's lovely, Sarah. Thank you.
That's that unique human thing again. We keep coming back to. You're not going to get that from an AI, the unexpected thing. Not to mention like the basic stuff. If my character says they're really angry and they go, yeah, I really love it when you do that. AI reads the sentence. It says, I really love it when you do that. It doesn't know that they're being sarcastic. And so the reading would be, oh, I really love it when you do that. Because they can't tell. They're not human.
And I would argue that because AI is advancing to a point where like we could have a human director directing the AI to do the line sarcastically, but it's still not embodied in a human organism. And so there's something missing.
Yeah.
It's that uncanny valley kind of
And
experience.
then at that point, if you're going to pay a director to basically humanize the AI, just get a human. What's the point? Yes. You're not going to save money having somebody go through with a fine-tooth comb, figuring out where a human would do something different.
Just have the human do it.
Just have the human do it. You're not going to save money at that point. So it's crazy stuff. It's crazy. Our machine overlords.
Well, Robin, thank you so much for being here with us today for this very human conversation and exploration together.
Yeah. I just wish we were humans in a room together, then we could eat cake. That would be so nice.
That's the missing piece.
Please give me cake.
That's the missing piece. I am actually, I've got one thing I wanted to say. I hope you'll keep an eye out for a PBS film coming out October 1st, I believe. It's called The American Vice President, and it talks about the office of the vice presidency and how it came to be what it is in the 25th Amendment in terms of how that got passed so that we know what to do when we call up our vice president to take over. Really, again, history and civics, things we humans need to be aware of. I'm really proud to be able to be part of that process.
What was your role in producing that documentary?
I was the narrator.
Okay.
Really good producer, writer. I mean, the writing was just so good. I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I had to make this thing as good as the writing was, and it's really just right on the money. So
that's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Crafting Audiobooks. We've been your hosts, Jennifer Jill Araya
and Sarah Beth Goer,
wishing you happy audiobook listening and/or crafting. Bye for now.